Today, we explore Tanium patching for Linux. Have you seen that recent patching Tech Talk customer success story with Dennis? He talked about the now famous zero touch patching episode we did 2 years ago. Well, that video is still at the top of the list here on the Tech Talks playlist because you voted with your clicks. It's the most popular video, and I've got it linked below just in case you haven't seen it. Well, that video was about zero touch Windows patching. Today, Jason Wasser is back to do the same thing for Linux patching, and we're going to do it in two parts. First, we're going to talk about what are the mechanics of how do you do Linux patching in Tanium, and what does zero-touch patching for Linux look like. And then the second part, we're going to show you the Lite Touch version. Okay, zero touch meaning, okay, hands-free. Light touch, sometimes you do want some hands in the process. But then also the second part, after this episode, we're going to talk about also how to use Tanium Automate. Okay, autonomous endpoint management is really big for Tanium this year. All those videos are, again, really popular in the playlist. We're going to specifically focus on Linux patching with Tanium Automate. So, Jason, welcome back to the show. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Jason Wasser. I'm a senior advanced consulting engineer at Tanium, and my background is in operations. Patching is what I do, is what I've done for so long, and I love to help customers be successful in that, automate as much as they can, and get their lives back.
Well, it's good to have you back, Jason. Now, before we dive in, I've just got to call out your credentials. All right. I was on linuxbeard.com and the sysadmin subreddit just before we started this recording. And I actually saw a thread titled, I want to be a sysadmin one day, but I can't grow a beard. I just have to call it. It looks like we're both qualified. I don't have the stuff up top, but I've always appreciated your high and that tight, really sharp looking haircut you always sport. But you've got a little bit of a beard there, so you're qualified today.
Yeah, I live in both worlds, right? I love Linux, I love Windows, and I do Mac OS too. So I just like operating systems.
Well, a core strength of Tanium, people have known for years, and a lot of the reason people like the Tanium platform is because it's cross-platform, Windows, Mac, and Linux, like you just said. So help us out here as we get started. I'm a Windows guy classically, so help me understand the world of Linux patching.
For some of us, we've kind of grown up in a Windows-centric world, right? But since then, over the decades, Linux has risen to rival Windows, and in many ways, it's surpassed it. But Linux needs patching just like everybody else. And so it's true. For some of us, there is a bit of a mystery of how Linux works and how we ought to be patching it. But thankfully, the Tanium patch module gives us that simplified approach, like a common user interface, common workflow, and platform for patching both Windows and Linux. So we do want to give you that introductory knowledge, like how does Linux patching work with Tanium? And then as we understand those concepts, then we can build on that, how we can do some automation. So what I want to do is like you said, Ash, I want to talk about Linux patching from a newbie perspective, right? So if I am a Windows person, how would I understand Linux patching? And I know some Linux diehard fans might get offended, but I'm okay with that because I want to help the Windows admins understand and grasp the differences between the platforms. So not only that they can patch it, but that they can also appreciate it and be maybe even enamored by the uniqueness and elegance of Linux.
Uniqueness of Linux. That's a very polite way to say it. There's a lot of unique things to discover about distros and so forth, and that's what makes it challenging sometimes to administer from trying to like a single tool perspective because of some of the flavor differences that we find. I was going to ask. Why would I use Tanium for patching Linux? But I think you nailed it there. You said there's a benefit of this single automation and workflow. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
You've mentioned the zero-touch patching video that we did for Windows, and we're actually going to use a lot of the same techniques right? So what's going to be helpful is that the tools and the things that you've learned for patching Windows is going to be very useful in the console when you start to patch Linux as well.
Coming from a Windows world, it's all about Patch Tuesday. There's no Patch Tuesday in the Linux world. What does block and tackle? What's a cadence look like in a Linux world for patching?
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those where I have to give you the depends answer, right? And we're going to tackle how we should do that. But it really does depend because, like you said, there's the patch Tuesday. It's pretty predictable for Windows patching, but patches for Linux can come out any day of the month. And so we need to be able to account for that in our patching strategies. And for some customers, that's not as important, right? We just need to get the patches out there. That's all we care about. That's where zero touch patching is going to shine for them. And for other customers, they might be more particular about the versions of patches that they install across their life cycle. And in that case, we're going to recommend a light touch automation that we'll cover in the next video.
Again, a newbie question, and I don't want to frustrate all of our seasoned Linux admins out there. We're going to get there, but uh, and when I've got a repo that I'm going to pull down my patches for, does that include like the third party apps and so forth? Because sometimes in the Windows world, we just think deploy is going to do my apps and patch is going to do my OS. Are those lines kind of blurry on the Linux side?
They are definitely blurry because there are repositories, and we'll get into the differences, but there are repositories that are built in for many operating systems that usually contain just the base requirements and then some third party, but typically you might add additional repositories which source the third party packages. And so adding repositories, managing repositories, visibility on those repositories are all the things that Tanium Patch can help you with.
Well, I know you brought a little something special to kick things off with today, so I'm gonna get out of the way here and let you do your thing, and then I'll just do my usual shtick where I interrupt you with questions. How's that?
That sounds good. Yeah, and the something special is I just wanted to, before we even dive into the how, I wanted to think about the why, right? It's always important to remember the why of what we do. And sure, most of us we patch because that's our job, right? That's what we're paid to do. But I think we need to remember that keeping our endpoints patched reduces risk for our organizations. It increases the security hygiene of the environment. And by locking the doors and shutting all the windows, you reduce the attack surface for the adversaries. And this protects the customer's data, the business, your job, and ultimately all of us, right? Our digital way of life in this interconnected world relies upon the security of our systems that we all take for granted. And you patch admins, you play a huge role by effectively patching your endpoints that you're responsible for. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for all the tireless and thankless efforts that you do for all of us.
Yeah, that's we just here in the U.S. we just passed the what was it like Administrative Assistant Recognition Day. How about a sysadmin Recognition Day, right? So yeah, high five to everybody out there that's keeping us safe. Thank you.
Right. So what I want to do first is talk about what are the basics of Linux and Linux patching. And so what I wanted to do is if you head over to help.tanium.com, right, and you search for Linux patch automation, and you'll see there's a new article there called Effective and Controlled Linux Patch Automation. And basically what we're going to be covering today and in this series, you can find in here. And if you like spoilers, go ahead and read ahead. But we're going to focus on the Tanium patch components for Linux, as well as the zero touch patch automation. And this walks through all the different basics that we need to understand that we're going to talk about now. And before we get into actually patching, we need to talk about distributions, right? So there are many different types of Linux distributions. And while the Linux kernel is the heart of the platform, different vendors build and support their own implementations. So Tanium Patch does support most, if not all, enterprise Linux distributions, such as RedHat, Oracle, Ubuntu, SUSE, Debian, Amazon, Rocky, Alma, and I can never remember them all off the top of my head. But you can head over to help.tanium.com and you can see all the distributions that we support. So when we think about patch compliance, right, or patch automation, our goal is patch compliance. That's achieved through deploying patches in assigned maintenance windows. But before we get there, we really have to understand how the Linux operating system scans and identifies which patches are available. So what is a package manager? So the Linux operating system has built-in package managers to detect, install, update, remove software. And in the Linux world, software, specifically patches, can be made up of one or more packages and their dependency packages. So for instance, if I need to update the SSH server on a Linux endpoint, it may require updating additional open SSH libraries as well. The package manager does this dependency resolution for you. The package manager communicates with repositories, which host the metadata and the packages, right? So that the metadata, the package files are there, and that's for installing, updating, patching software on the Linux endpoint.
So, Jason, what could we compare that to in the Windows world? I know some people are familiar with like Chocolatey. Rob Reynolds, shout out, a long time ago, created that package manager for Windows. So does this like, if I'm in a WSUS world, Windows Update Agent, what's the parity here?
Yeah, that's perfect, right? And we do want to help people understand the comparisons and where they differ. So for Windows, we have the Windows Update Agent. It's built in the operating system. It is the built-in package manager for Windows that does the patch scanning and installation. Different Linux distributions have their own package managers, such as Yum, DNF, Zipper, and APT. And you don't need to remember all that because Tanium Patch interfaces with the package manager for scanning and deployments. Now, the metadata and the patches for Windows comes from Microsoft. You could think of WSUS like a repository, and each Linux distribution has one or more standard repositories. And other repositories can be added to Tanium Patch as needed. So in a way, Tanium Patch abstracts the whole process. Tanium Patch can orchestrate the package manager to scan with the appropriate metadata, as well as deploy patches across Windows and Linux. And really the main difference is how the metadata and the patch downloads get to the endpoint.
So that sounds like some of that economy of scale that you talked about earlier with a common workflow, while we've got completely different apples and oranges here on the OSs. Tanium is kind of that abstraction layer.
That's right. And that's going to help your patching teams, whether it's one patching team that has to manage both Windows and Linux, or if they're separate teams, but at least that they can each have help each other with their configurations and also that common reporting. So when we talk about patch compliance, we need to know how compliant are we across Windows, across Linux, across all of our endpoints. And we'll show you how to do that too. We can dive into the console now. So what I want to talk about is the scan techniques. How do we find out which patches are installed, or more importantly, which ones are applicable? So I'm going to head over to the scan management here, and we'll soon jump into actually building out the deployments, but I just want to show you what it looks like so that you can see the different scanning techniques. So we have two ways of determining patches that are applicable for Linux. We have repository scan and we have Tanium scan. The repository scan, as you can see here, it tells the endpoint to scan and download patches with whatever repositories are already configured on the endpoint, right? This is the easiest way to start to get visibility into your patches in your environment. Now, optionally, you could say, no, I need to start standardizing which repositories are used across my environment. So I can start to say, no, we're going to use the Rocky Linux 8 repository and specify that. So that's one method, and that's useful for certain types of endpoints, and we'll dig into that, which ones. I also wanted to mention Tanium scan. And Tanium scan has the ability to do repository snapshots as well. But Tanium scan leverages the efficiency of the Tanium client architecture to deliver the metadata and the patch downloads. This means that Tanium instance communicates with the repositories and sends the data to the endpoints without the need to manage your own repositories. The endpoints no longer need direct access to the repositories, such as public internet repositories, because the Tanium infrastructure will get the data that they need to them.
So that
So
sounds
I,
like a major architecture design decision right up front. Like, do you want the endpoints to do their own, or do you want Tanium to just be that direct connection? So I can see that's a significant maybe bandwidth impact and maybe some exceptions on IPs and firewalls and so forth for what addresses are going back and forth.
yeah, you're right. And that's why repository scan is the easiest to start with because most likely the customer already has repositories configured or stood up. But that also means they're likely managing their own repository servers. So now we're thinking of the hub spoke. We've got repo servers distributed throughout our infrastructure, throughout the world, maybe, that have to be maintained. And that's okay if that's what you want to continue to do. But Tanium Scan can actually leverage our architecture to help you reduce or even eliminate those internal repositories that you've been having to manage.
And again, Windows example, WSUS, some people maintain their own WSUS server where it downloads their own copies. So that'd be like a repo. So customers want to just to take the straight vanilla internet repo, or maybe they've got their own customized internal repo. So that again, another design decision there sounds like.
Right. And depending on the type of endpoint, the type of customer, they will likely use a mix of these scan techniques. So for instance, cloud VMs, it's actually more efficient for them to use repository scan because their repositories are right next door in the cloud. There's, that's actually the fastest way for them to get metadata. I wanted to mention we do support repository snapshots with Tanium Scan. This allows us to lock patches and dependency versions to a particular point in time. And we'll explain the value of this and why we want to use it and how to use it in the next episode. So for repositories, you saw I was selecting them. There are a number of built-in repositories for all the major Linux distributions. And of course, you can also add your own custom repositories as needed. Once you add the repositories where we use those, typically after we set up all our scanning, we think about patch lists, right? So if you think about the zero touch patching method we used for Windows, we started with scanning, then we talked about patch lists, then we talked about deployments.
So,
Well,
hey, before you jump out of here on the repos, I see this long list of different distros. Is this preset when you install Tanium Patch? Does it include all those by default, or are those just in our demo environment?
these are built in by default. So I'm going to navigate over to patch lists to talk about patch lists for Tanium for Linux patching. So this patch list is here to remind us that we should not use patch lists with Tanium patching for Linux. And there's a reason for this, right? We talked about how patches are released regularly on Patch Tuesday, so it's very predictable. But because the release date of patches can be whenever, using patch lists with release dates is not recommended for Tanium patching for Linux. So what we do recommend is we have a special way of doing deployments for Linux operating systems. So I'm moving over to patch deployment for Linux, and you can see I have these two new options. I can install all updates or install all security updates. And this is what we recommend that you do when you do this. And we'll walk through that process as well when we talk about the zero-touch patch automation process. Now, the other thing I do want to mention is you can still use block lists. So if you need to block certain things like Java, you can build out block lists and assign those to your endpoints to ensure that certain patches do not get updated. And the last and most important thing before we even dive into any type of automation or deployments, we need to make sure we have our maintenance windows defined and built out, right? So that's a critical, we want to make sure the patches are installed, but we want to make sure they're installed at the right time. So that's the basics of Linux patching. And now we want to get into how do we actually do zero-touch patching.
And again, standard practice on those maintenance windows, that's going to be tagging endpoints, right? Typically to know which maintenance window they're going in. Any nuances there on the Linux side of the house with tagging for maintenance windows? I'm
Yeah, a
guessing it's
lot of
pretty
it,
standard.
it is, right? You have to define, you got to work with the business to define when Linux endpoints can be patched. Do you need to define your computer groups, whether you use custom tags or other attributes such as naming convention or subnets or application present? So you do want to make sure that you have those well defined so that you can install patches when you need to. Now, most of the time, Linux endpoints don't require restart. but it's good to restart them. And sometimes they do need that restart from patching. So you want to have those maintenance windows set up correctly. So let's get into zero touch patch automation. First, we do want zero touch patch automation to do that, to help us ensure we don't need to have continued effort every month to ensure our Linux endpoints are patched, right? And again, this zero touch method may not fit all Linux endpoints, but with any automation, we should all start somewhere, right? We want to see what we can automate, like maybe our dev machines, and then look to see where we can expand the automation to get some of our time back. So we're going to start with the flow that similar to what we use for patching for Windows, we're going to start with scan management. So the couple of things we do need to make zero-touch patch automation happen. We need a couple of computer groups for our couple of scan configs, and then we need one or more deployments. So the two computer groups that we need, and actually let's take a look at that together. I'm going to navigate to administration and computer groups. The first computer group that we'll need is called patch supported systems. And this one is already built in. So no work needed there. We're just going to be using this later on when we assign it to a scan configuration. However, we do need to create the next one, and it's called the all on-premises Linux. So the goal of this is to collect all the machines that are Linux that are not cloud endpoints. And we're going to assign that to a scan configuration. This filter here is in the KB article, so you don't have to try to zoom in and write it down. All the instructions here in the article of how to build this.
I just got to
So
say
now,
that's elegantly simple. I love it. Is Linux
yeah,
equals true and is cloud equals false? That is
yeah.
just beautiful. It's so elegant.
So for scan management, we need to build two scan configurations. The first one we need to build is called Zero Touch Tanium Scan. We're going to select the Linux platform, and we're going to select Tanium Scan. Now I'm going to add repositories that I want to include in this. I'm going to add the Rocky Linux repositories, and there's a number of them. So what I can do is step through and add each of those repositories one by one. I'm using Rocky Linux because it's freely available. We do support all the other distributions. We even support RedHat. It does require uploading your entitlement certificate to the console, but you can certainly do that. So I'll step through adding all the Rocky repositories. We'll set the frequency, the scanning frequency to 1 day, and we'll want to do that random scan delay. So they're not all trying to scan at the same time. And when I'm ready, I'm going to click Create Scan Configuration. I've already done that so that we can save some time here. So I have the Zero Touch Tanium Scan configuration with the Rocky repositories added. And then I targeted this to the all on-premises Linux. So that's why we built that. We want to make sure that the on-premises Linux servers use this scan configuration. The next scan configuration we want to build is called Zero Touch Repo Scan. So I'm going to choose the repository scan, which just says, hey, use whatever repos you already have configured on your endpoints, frequency 1 day, random scan delay 120 minutes, and then we'll create that. Again, we'll take a look at what that looks like here. And then I target it to that built-in computer group called patch supported systems. So what does that mean now? What we want to do next is make sure that they're appropriately prioritized. So there's this button up here at the top right we often overlook. It's this prioritize. When there are multiple scan configurations, an endpoint can only have one, right? So the one with the highest priority wins. And so what I want to make sure is that my zero touch Tanium scan is at the highest position, and my repo scan is kind of like the catch-all. So if the repos aren't defined here, and maybe they're a cloud VM or an on-prem that's a different distribution, they're going to be caught by this second one. And so I can use this method to make sure all the endpoints are doing their most efficient scanning possible.
I just have to say
So
that's really nice, really clever, the way that's prioritized. Again, I just love the order. It just seems so clean.
I'm glad you like it. I like it too. And hopefully this will be a lot easier for people now once they get to watch this video and implement this. So we have our endpoint scanning, right? We have them either falling into one or two scan configurations if they're Linux. The next step is to build out the deployment. And this is where we can create our deployment for Linux patching. So this is where it's called Linux Zero Touch Patching. And then I can specify that I want the Linux platform. And again, this is where you have to make a decision as an organization. Install all the updates or install all the security updates. I'm going to recommend all the updates, but again, your organization has to make a decision on which one that you want to do. Once you make that decision, then we can select the computer group. And here we could just say, hey, I want all Linux. All my Linux endpoints, I want to be zero touch patch automation. So that I can specify that I want this to be not one time, I need it to be ongoing. That's part of that automation process. And then if I want to distribute the deployment over time, so they're not all trying to install at the exact same time, I can do that. Make sure your maintenance windows are large enough or long enough to account for this distribute over time. Usually we recommend like 2 additional hours of maintenance window. And then finally, we need to make a decision. Do you want to restart your Linux endpoints? I recommend it, but right, your organization has to make that decision. Sometimes there's requirements on that. Not all patches will require restart. So if you select restart and the endpoint does not need it, it will not restart. But if, say, a kernel update comes out and installs the kernel update, it would restart the endpoint if you selected to restart.
Oh, so I want to call that out. What I just heard you say was that if a restart is not required by the patch, it's not going to restart the machine anyway. So this is not an absolute every time restart, only if needed.
That's correct.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's a big difference in the Linux operating system, right? There are a few patches for Windows that don't require a restart, but pretty much you're going to be restarting every time. But in this case, for Linux, we don't need to do that every time. So when we're ready, we can preview to continue and then deploy this deployment. Now I've already have it deployed and I have this Linux zero touch patch automation deployment. I can see that I have my endpoints already in that deployment. And this will then, as new patches come out and are released, the endpoints will scan with those scan configurations. They will act on this deployment by downloading their patches and queuing them up for their maintenance window, and then installing those patches, restarting if necessary, and continually do that without any interaction or extra work from you all. So this is that zero touch patch automation. We've set that up in just a couple of minutes, and now you can be saving your time and doing something else instead of babysitting patching.
Wow, we just got there so fast. I know for you this is routine. For our audience, it may or may not. Maybe they've done Linux patching for years, but Tanium's the new thing. So you've just kind of walked through each of the components, and you've got that walkthrough article that's going to help as well. So this is good.
Yeah, and the last thing we really want to mention, and I think we try to mention this every time we do a tech talk, is showing your work, right? We're putting a lot of effort into this, and we need to be able to show that the effort and the results of our efforts. So I'm heading over to dashboards, clicking endpoint management. I'm going to look at the endpoint management dashboard. This is built in to Tanium. You have this dashboard by default. This is going to show us some metrics around patching. And what I want to do is focus this on the all Linux computer group. So now, as I pivot this dashboard, I can see my patch metrics for all my Linux endpoints and see the effectiveness of our zero-touch patch automation. And really what I want to do is scroll down to this compliance reporting, because this is the outcome of patching, right? What do we want? We want all our patches installed. That's the outcome we want. We want to show that too. So I can see what it looks like today. I'm 94% compliant. That's pretty good. I've got one machine that's compliant pending restart. That's helpful to know too. And then I can see how are we doing over time. It looks like I'm doing really well in my Linux patching, and then something happened. I got a machine that needs attention. So that can help us with this overall patch compliance. And sometimes we need a little bit, this is good for a higher level. Maybe we need to send this data out to our managers, to our leadership, to other teams. But sometimes we need, for our own teams, we need to know more with more granularity, how far out of compliant are our endpoints. So maybe we've got endpoints that are missing 6 to 10 patches, 26 to 50 patches or more. So this kind of breaks it down to more granularity. And again, how does that look over time? Are we getting better at patching? Hopefully we are. So that's patch reporting with compliance. You can use this dashboard that's built in. We have a whole video of how to make your own patch compliance dashboards if you'd like as well. And I think that wraps us up for zero touch patching with Linux.
So I'm curious, in the world of Windows with Patch Tuesday, these charts that we're looking at, there's always a big dip on compliance because, hey, just big batch of patches. What you've seen with Linux patch reporting, is it more flat, like patches always rolling out all the time? So it's not like, do we see these big cliffs and valleys in the chart?
It depends on how much automation you have, right? So there could be where there's going to be new patches are released, and the patching cycle for Linux may not be monthly in some organizations. So if they do follow this article and it's zero touch patch automation, there's maintenance windows might be once a month or once a quarter. And so you would see different charts of hills and valleys of patch compliance depending on when they can actually patch those endpoints.
That makes sense. As we kind of wind down this first part, what kind of customer stories do you have? What have you seen people doing in the real world with Tanium and Linux patching?
When it makes sense, this zero touch patch automation really helps them save time, right? Because in some organizations, like we talked about, it's a Windows admin who has to manage Linux endpoints. They don't know it as well. And so when they can set up the zero touch patch automation, maybe they just have a handful of Linux endpoints and they just need to keep them patched and secure. So this saves them time. In larger organizations or more mature Linux organizations, they typically will want to use our Lite Touch patch automation method. And that's because those repository, the patches come out different times of the month. And so they want to have more control over that. And I think that's where they see a lot of success in that, okay, we can actually reduce or eliminate our repositories, still maintain patching consistency across our life cycles, and also reduce tooling because we don't need to have another patch tool that's trying to do Linux as opposed to Windows. And really that common interface and reporting really helps the organization as a whole.
That sounds like a lot of benefits there. I'm curious, are there any frequently asked questions or like common troubleshooting things where when you get a call that somebody needs help with Linux patch, they've missed a common step or something like that?
I think the most common is going to be the RedHat patching because it's a very common Linux distribution. And we have a KB article that describes the process of importing your certificate, your entitlement certificate into the console. What Tanium can do with RedHat patching is pretty powerful by the instance and the architecture of Tanium collecting that metadata or gathering that and getting it to the endpoints. And that really helps simplify the administration and management of RedHat. But it is a little tricky to get that certificate process done, but we've revamped our article recently to make it even more clear. So I definitely would recommend that, and we can put that in the show notes.
So much benefit to using a single platform for both Windows and Linux patching. All this common management and reporting. Thank you, Jason, for this walkthrough. Now stay tuned because in part 2, we're coming back around with more on the Lite Touch, but then we're also going to focus on Tanium Automate. Okay, Tanium Automate is part of our autonomous endpoint management platform now that you've heard about at Converge and you've seen some of those episodes here on the channel. We're going to specifically apply that to Linux patching coming up next. Now, before you go look at the part 2 video, we've got a number of resources as usual linked below. That article that Jason began talking with, that article is linked in the show notes below. Also, some of our other knowledge articles around Linux patching and some of the nuances there, as well as a tuning Tanium video that we did. It's been a while now since we did that one, but it's mostly still good for you. And if you've not heard of tuning Tanium, our support center folks who answer your support tickets, every now and then they'll do a video once a month actually, but we'll pick depending on what's the current wind that we're catching from ticket volumes. We're going to do a targeted learning webinar on some of the most popular troubleshooting things you need to understand as a Tanium admin. That's called Tuning Tanium. You can search for those in our Tanium Resource Center at help.tanium.com. We've got one specific to Linux patch linked in the show notes below. So stay tuned. And until then, go Tanium.